people had such big questions about what it meant to engage with audiences in this suddenly changed landscape, a new set of parameters. We were all navigating the unknown. I confess, there were moments where I said, oh my goodness, what on earth can this mean? There are factors beyond our control. That was more valuable than ever in answering these big questions that the industry had. Tell us a story of when you experienced that sense of belonging. People will hold you accountable as an organization, and they'll make a decision to go and work with a brand or buy a product that is aligned with their values. The behavioral outcomes of belonging is that they are 167%.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever-changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we have Naomi Claire, founder and CEO of StoryCraft Lab. Naomi is an expert in experiential design, blending empathy and innovation to transform how brands connect with their audiences. She discusses the evolving role of empathy in design, the impact of strategic creativity during the pandemic, and more other stuff that will just blow your mind. Now, join us for a deep dive into the intersection of empathy, design, and innovation. Naomi, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, John Paul. It's lovely to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Before we deep dive into the confusing questions, because I do have some, do you mind giving us a quick intro on who Naomi is? What's your expertise, experiences, and what keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and founder of StoryCraft Lab, which was an experiential agency. I first set it up back in 2015, but it's really taken off since 2020, essentially, and the pandemic times, which was when we rebooted and added three little letters, lab, to the end of our name. So it became really kind of central to design thinking and audience-centered engagement was our area of focus. To me, that lab actually symbolizes a lot of what's unique about our approach as an agency and creative thinkers, because it's all about the collaboration. It's about bringing diverse voices into places where they can get curious and experiment and be excited and mystified by the results that come from that collective effort.
If you don't mind me asking, most businesses during the pandemic, they got crushed. What made you confident that you're gonna make it out of the pandemic, and how did you actually put it off?
Yeah, so I had made the decision to reboot StoryCraft as StoryCraft Lab with the new focus and the new branding, and I had picked ahead of time that March 2020 was going to be my date of relaunch. Lo and behold, that was also the month in which the pandemic was officially declared. And I confess, there were moments where I said, oh my goodness, what on earth can this mean? This must have been a terrible decision, Naomi. And I just had to kind of give it up to the universe and say, you know what, this is going to turn out in the way that it's going to turn out. There are factors beyond our control. And I had planned for a little bit of downtime as we did kind of retool and refocus the business anyway. So I kind of lent into that. And what we found actually was that period of time, people had such big questions about what it meant to engage with audiences in this suddenly changed landscape, a new set of parameters. We were all navigating the unknown together. And for us at Storycraft, with our new focus on audience understanding and audience-centered design and empathetic thinking, that was more valuable than ever in answering these big questions that the industry had. What does our audience need? How do we reach them? How do we ensure that our message is resonating within this new landscape and set of parameters? And as it turned out, we were very well equipped to help people get curious, to understand their audience better, and to collaborate. So it actually gave us a very quick transition to those three little letters, the LAB, the lab, and this new environment that we had to collaborate in. So we very quickly got comfortable and excited about the virtual space and how it could be best leveraged to connect folks. And that was really the kind of source of the takeoff for us. So we've actually grown from a group of 3 to nearly 20 in the years that followed from the pandemic.
That's amazing. That's a huge growth.
Yeah. Yes, so, we're trying to maintain it as well, in a way that is sustainable and intentional. But it's exciting to see that growth, because it really has. Now, the pandemic was a terrible experience. I wouldn't wish it again on anyone. But we've emerged from it with some tools and some new ways of working that can be beneficial if we use them in the right way.
Do you feel like it's much more efficient and better when you're working from home rather than when you're working in your office?
Oh, a bit of this and a bit of that. There are so for me personally, as a mom and a leader and a professional, the ability that working from home gives for me to kind of balance all of those different commitments and areas of my life that I want to give time to and excel at in order to feel like a really awesome human being. That's the benefit of kind of having this remote culture. And actually, when I started Storycraft Lab, we had a shared office space in downtown DC, which quickly went away with the pandemic. We all kind of had to retreat to our own homes, and what we found was that everybody quite liked that. There are a lot of women at Storycraft Lab, more men now, but certainly kind of the ability to have a family and to balance in those pieces of our lives, whether it's a family or some other focus, that help to make us all as individuals feel whole and fulfilled. The ability to work remotely has a great impact there. And periodically I've asked the team, so, should we look at getting together more in the office? And everybody said, no, we're good. But that said, the benefits of actually being together within a shared space are huge. We just had our first retreat last week in Washington DC, and the team now is, we're fully remote. There are people in all of the time zones across the US and into England as well, and it was so special to get together, and for me to see those team members that have worked together remotely and developed relationships remotely finally being able to give each other a hug and say hi and spend that kind of quality time together. So I am a huge believer in both, actually, like the flexibility to be remote when it makes sense for the individual and for the group. I mean, there's a cost saving sometimes there as well, which efficiencies are good. We always need to find those. But finding those times where we can get together, that can't necessarily be recreated entirely, So, and I think also for learning and development, especially for younger team members, that there is something in that shared office space culture that is really good for kind of on the job learning. So we've had to develop some pretty intentional ways in which we share space remotely and allow for that kind of agile and rapid thinking and feedback through development. That was a very long answer to your question.
That's amazing. Personally, what I like about doing work in a remote setting is the fact that when you're so full of stress in your job, you can just go down and maybe hug your dog, and all of your stress will go away. Right? You can just
you build into your environment all of those tools for resilience, right? And the things that we need daily. And I think that those thoughts do carry through to experience design as well, actually, kind of what we've learned about ourselves personally and how we like to work and connect personally. Those are really relevant insights for now, how we think about experience design.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Your academic experience is interior architecture and history and political science. Did you find that there's a direct relation on how you do things in your job right now with your academic background?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I have to say, I think there's a certain point in life, you get to a certain age where you look at these kind of different threads of your lived experience, and you start to see them kind of weaving into a tapestry. And when you see that picture emerge, it can be quite affirming. So my interest in history and politics was my undergraduate degree in England. There's a heavy component of sociology to that. It was modern history that I was interested in, and especially political extremism as well. And so there's this kind of ideological focus on sociology and how societies are formed and governed that I always found just fascinating. I took the study for the subject for my undergraduate because I was fascinated by the topic, not because I had a particular career path in mind. So when I moved to the US, I found myself working at a strategy consulting firm, first as an executive assistant and then as more of an analyst, an administrator in their human assets team. And it was there that I started to coordinate things like their feedback training, their mentor matching processes. What does it mean to think about learning and development? And there was also like a lot of performance reviews, looking at kind of projects and how they were measuring and assessing success. So there was an interesting time of my life. I was there for about 5 years and I just learned a lot about the world of business, but I wasn't quite sure what my path was yet. And it turned out that I was one of the gentlemen that I supported in my role at that strategy consulting firm. His name's David Levy. He was a partner there. And he had previously been head of R&D at Herman Miller and had a background in architecture. And he started to encourage me in thinking about kind of creativity and ideas and how those might be expressed and communicated. For whatever reason, I think he could see an interest that I held there in creative thinking. And he encouraged me to put together a portfolio, introduced me to what it meant to go out and seek feedback on that portfolio, which I did. And then that portfolio took me to the Rhode Island School of Design, where I got my master's in interior architecture. And lo and behold, it wasn't exactly interior architecture that I ended up in as a field, but it was RISD and that process, the process of thinking that they have at RISD, and they have a lot of rigor around moving from a really robust concept, making sure that the concept and the idea is sound and exciting and creatively expressed, and then kind of stepping through the delivery process. So once you have the idea and the concept, what does it mean to design the details of manifesting this idea? And I think that is really kind of, as I've walked through, when I talk about the tapestry of the work that I do now, it's inherently human-centered. There's design thinking in there. I see that going back to the work that I did at the strategy consulting firm. There's the design process, the design product, this creativity that comes, and a lot of it all the way goes back to kind of its roots in thinking about the ways that people organize their societies and relate to one another. So a very long and winding road that really has only started to make sense to me in the last few years. But it's been just such an enlightening journey.
Experiential design is not that common of a word. When I first tried to speak it a few weeks ago, preparing for this podcast, I misspoke it a couple of times. Experiential design, I couldn't speak it because it's such a far concept for me. I don't know for other marketers, but if you're someone new in the industry or just someone who's not very familiar with it, what is experiential design?
What is experiential design? It is a space where humans can have experiences, and I think it has become this umbrella term within the design industry that encompasses the intersection of many disciplines. So over the years, I've done a lot of teaching. I still do teach. It's one of my core values is education. And I've taught in the event design space, in the exhibit design space, in the planning and management space. And I think that's where kind of experiential is this interdisciplinary environment that uniquely you meet people from all different areas of, there are marketers that are interested in experiences because they tell the stories of their products or their organization. There are architects who really think about the ways in which space is used and utilized and formed. There are industrial designers that ensure that the materials stand up. There are exhibit designers that look at labels and narrative. There are copywriters. There are graphic designers. Everybody comes to play in the space of experiential design. And to me, that is just glorious. It's so exciting to see what happens in this melting pot of perspective, where at the end of the day, when we're thinking about experience, the person that we have to consider is the audience. So for everybody from all of these different kind of walks and roles to be gathering together to consider what it means to impact those humans that will step into that experience. That's really exciting to me. So for somebody new in the industry, number one, I would just celebrate their interest in humanity and engaging with humans. And number two, I would say to them, find the unique way in which you contribute. We all have skills from all different areas of expertise that we can bring to create these experiences.
For anyone who might be wondering, how important is it actually for a brand to share their story to their audience? What is the actual benefit of it?
Ooh, okay. So when we share stories, we create emotional connection. We create that understanding. We communicate our values as a group, and all of these things will lead to a sense of belonging. And when an individual has a sense of belonging with an organization or with a brand, a number of really amazing things are unlocked. We're starting to see some amazing data. So if individuals experience a sense of belonging, one of the behavioral outcomes of belonging is that they are 167% more likely to recommend your brand or your experience or your product or your organization or your employer, right? So that recommendation is a behavioral outcome of belonging, and belonging is tied to that sharing of a story that produces that emotional connection.
There might be some critics out there who's maybe in not that straightforward of an industry to actually create a store for. Maybe they're a shoe brand, maybe they're a tool manufacturing company, and they just say to themselves, "No, we don't have any store to share because there's not much of an emotional connection that we can go for." What's your message to those people?
We all have a story.
Yeah.
We all have a story to share. And if we get to a place where we can share those stories, even if it is an everyday story or something that is not epic or kind of movie material, it is still something that humans out there will connect with. And that those stories sit at the heart of marketing. So, even that kind of tool manufacturer that may not feel like they have a big story to share has a need to market. And therefore, if they go back to their story as part of their marketing, they'll yield great results there as well. So the emotional piece comes, but it's
Yeah.
also a layer on top of purpose, I think.
The brand messaging of any brand always evolves over time. But, since the big movement on companies being more environmentally friendly, did you see a trend that companies want to just show that they are that company?
Yeah, I think that's one of the concerns
Yeah,
is like, how do we ensure that some of the messaging doesn't become performative?
yeah.
And that it really does stay authentic and true to their values. This is where I think that the Generation Y and millennials and beyond are just brilliant in the marketplace because they have a very strong sensor for when things are authentic or not. And audiences in general these days are quite discerning. So they will look, if you're making statements about belonging or inclusion or diversity, and you are not living that out within your board or your structures or your actions, people will hold you accountable as an organization, and they'll make a decision to go and work with a brand or buy a product that is aligned with their values.
Empathy is at the core of what you do. Correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong. Could you
Mm-hmm.
elaborate on how you incorporate empathy with how you do your work, how you manage people, and how you just generally work with people?
Yeah, absolutely. So the innovative design thinking approach, this is an approach that is used to generate new products or to disrupt marketplaces with new services and offerings, begins with this act of empathy. And while empathy is associated with kind of the softer, more emotional side of things, in the context of design thinking, it's actually more of a process step that you go through and a set of activities to better understand your audiences so that you can unlock those insights that can show you the way to innovation, right? By identifying their challenges or their needs and the opportunities that sit there. So for us as a part of our process, empathy begins with that audience understanding. What are the ways in which we can gather information to better understand our audience from a data perspective? What are the formats that allow us to listen in to what those audiences are saying and sharing. And what are the activities that encourage and create a space where that conversation, that dialogue, that engagement with audiences can occur. So it's the messaging. It's the measurement. It's the listening, and then it's those spaces for engagement and the activation. Those become these levers that we use to develop that empathetic understanding. Because once you have that insight into your audience, what they need, what's going to resonate with them, what they'll spend money on, what they'll get excited about, what they'll recommend to them. It gives you, from a design perspective, a really strong North Star that you can follow. And especially when you have a large group of stakeholders that are involved in the process of change, innovation, transformation, design and development, having that North Star is crucial so that, everybody is aligned with that kind of shared purpose and goal.
We've seen the belonging playbook on your background, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what that is, what kind of playbook that is, that about a game or whatever. Can you talk more about it?
Sure, absolutely. So, one of the projects that we worked on in the pandemic was with the Google Experience Institute. And we were initially retained by Google's Experience Institute to help them better understand evolving techno-social norms, which is a very googly term for trying to figure out how folks are dealing with the context of the pandemic and using technology as a way to drive those social connections. As we were doing this work, we were actually testing out one of our other tools called the Experience Profiles, which is this preferences system for personalization. And what we heard in our research, in our user research and our audience listening in that testing, was this word belonging. And people would talk about community and belonging, and they would talk about personalization and belonging, and they would talk about people and belonging. And belonging became this word we were hearing with such frequency that the team at Google actually asked us to open up a tandem investigation into what belonging means for different people and whether belonging was an outcome that we could design for with consistency and with intention and in a way that could be measured. So the way that we researched belonging from that empathetic point of view was to ask people to tell us their stories. Tell us a story of when you experienced that sense of belonging. What was your state of mind when you encountered this experience? What happened along the way? How did it transform you and your perspective? So we heard hundreds of stories and the kind of insights that came from those stories revealed a set of pathways towards belonging. There are 8 different pathways. They're all in the belonging playbook. And this has become a living research project. We now have both the playbook, which represents all of the insights and the stories from that research. We also have a structure called the Wheel of Belonging, which is both an app and a physical environment. It's an interactive piece and a kind of an IP framework that allows for measurement of belonging, and it becomes a space where people do share those stories, and we're able to listen and capture data on the keywords of the stories that are shared with us about belonging. So it's partnership is really, that's a part of the lab concept with Storycraft Lab. We always are finding people to partner with that are equally curious and excited about humans as well.
Let's talk more about partnership, because you've grown from 3 to 20 team members in just a few years, starting, from the pandemic. That's an amazing goal. That's an amazing accomplishment. What role did partnership play in that?
Yeah. I've tested out partnerships in a number of different formats and ways, and I'm still learning about what those good partnerships mean. But for me as a CEO, I think maybe I'll reflect on that. I've had to partner much more closely with my team, my colleagues as well, in order to continue to grow the business and move forward at scale. And that for me has been a real learning opportunity. We've had a number of brand partnerships on the kind of product side and what we put out there. But for me at that personal level, that's really where I've seen partnership have a really strong role. Is what does it mean to actually go from being a CEO in air quotes of a 3-person organization to actually moving into a group where we have more structured teams that are delivering projects. Partnership has been at the heart of all of that, understanding where values are aligned. And I think that's been my most important takeaway, both on external and internal partnerships, is ensuring that values are aligned and that we're leaning into those empowering values that are motivational to everybody, that allow for growth and experimentation and curiosity. I think that, in the world of business, we often shy away from emotional terms. But I think that there is absolutely an element of friendship that comes with partnership. It's developing this sense of trust. And I think that has to be present in all partnerships, really. Because those partnerships should be places where you market together, you develop together, you get curious together, you understand what success means for the different table, and having that, it's almost like audience understanding, but at a very different scale, right? You kind of have to take those same tools and process steps that you would do from a go-to-market plan and understanding your audience and bring it into the space of friendship to really hear and understand how friendship can enable everybody to grow.
This might be a more of an outside topic, but since you've grown from 3 to 20 people in just a couple of years, and I assume that most of the people that you're hiring should be aligned to the same goal as you do. How were you able to pull that off, finding the right people for your company, especially because you're in, I assume that you were never in the background of hiring.
Right, absolutely. I have been fortunate over the years to teach a number of very brilliant humans, whether it's been at RISD or at the Corcoran or at GWU, or now I'm adjunct faculty at NYU. And I've also been fortunate that a number of those very brilliant humans have been interested to continue working with Storycraft Lab after they graduate from their master's programs. Usually I'm teaching at the Melbourne. So it's that for me has been a really great funnel, I suppose, to just finding lovely humans that understand the way that I think. By the time any kind of conversations on recruiting take place, I will have spent a semester with them, and they will have spent a semester with me, and met some of the team through group projects and that kind of thing. So that, number one, has been really good. We've also, I'm really proud of this internship program that we've developed that moves people through these steps of internship towards coming on board full time, ultimately. So that has been a beautiful way to kind of really lean into that idea of growth over time as well. And we've had all kinds of folks move through the internship program, including one who's about to get his PhD. So he was a very qualified intern. And then some folks that have come on after they've completed their bachelor's. But for me, for the recruiting process, what that means is by the time they do come on board, the internship is a really great kind of training opportunity for them. And for us to get to know them as well.
That's amazing. And besides the fact that COVID basically forced everyone to learn how to, do work remotely, what other changes have you seen in terms of your industry and, just generally the workplace that you're in?
Yeah, I do think, as we touched on at the start of the call, the start of the conversation, that kind of remote culture. What does it mean to, instead of being like a shared studio space, be remote? So I think that that's had a big impact, and I think more generally, as we look at society as a whole, the loneliness that has come to attention through the pandemic and has sustained beyond is something that I think we have a quite complex relationship with, or complex responsibility to analyze and consider how we're going to and support humans through that journey from loneliness to connection and belonging. So I think that that's something that unfortunately the pandemic has left us with as a thorny problem to solve for. But I also see AI as a huge game changer, across the board, and how we as humans have to kind of lean into our trust with AI and learn to understand where and how we can partner with AI as a team member, as a companion, as a creative tool, and as an accelerator. And so we've been experimenting ourselves with lots of different ways to utilize and get curious and creative with AI.
For someone who's interested in doing experiential design for their own company and doesn't necessarily have the access for professionals like you, how can they extract their story from themselves? What questions can they ask their company to actually get to know what their story really is?
I think there's great potential here for actually using AI to help with that question. There are times where you can use AI as that curatorial voice. Like, hey, AI, go out and tell me what the story is of this particular organization. And when AI does that, it does go out to those kind of publicly available sources and what's being heard there to distill a story for you. So that is a very quick and increasingly accessible way to start considering the story. And, from there you can give AI lots of parameters, things that you're focused on, the word count that you want it to deliver against, the insights that you want to highlight. But yeah, I would encourage people to use AI as a storytelling tool.
It's amazing. Well, what if they're not as big of a company that AI can actually know what they're talking about? What can you do to actually know your story?
Oh, you can ask your friends.
Yeah.
The understanding that story is ultimately about listening. And sometimes it just takes talking to some friends.
Yeah.
It could take talking to family members outside. Like, if you're really curious what somebody thinks about your organization, sit down, ask your grandma, ask your cousin, like, what do you think about this? And start to hear that story. And then there are other people internally, so if you don't, the qualitative is just as valuable as the quantitative scale of data.
Yeah.
And there are ways in which you can just start asking questions about curiosity, and then sit and listen and reflect on what you've heard, and start to pull out some of the insights from the conversations that you have. So what I would say to you is, you can start with friends, you can start with close folks, take a look at if you're really committed to these conversations, make sure that you start to kind of keep a list, kind of keep tabs on who you've spoken to, and continue to ask yourself the question around the diversity and the relevancy of the perspectives that you're curating, right? Because I think that there's always a worry that if we just keep it to our friends, then we're kind of within our own bubble, essentially. So, once you've gotten comfortable with what it means to ask questions and hear stories from people that are within your own bubble, try to challenge yourself to step outside of that bubble and hear from some additional perspectives that may have something enlightening to share, a different lived experience that would give you more innovative insights, or perhaps a very kind of strong relevancy tied to the organization or the product or the idea that you're pursuing.
As you mentioned AI quite recently, how do you think experiential design or just experience design overall will be affected with AI or other type of technology?
I think right now it's about kind of figuring out personalization. For a long time, audiences have been saying, and they continue to say, every year, every survey I look at, it's somewhere in the low 70%. Audiences are saying that they want personalization. They want to feel kind of seen and understood by brands in that personal way they engage with. So I think AI has huge potential for accelerating that personalization, just as long as people can figure out, having that robust IP and methodology behind those recommendations so that they can be measured and assessed and iterated as a formula. So I think that's where there will be great impact. I kind of call it the Amazonification of experience design. I imagine that when you shop on Amazon, you get the kind of, well, you liked this product, so here are 5 others that we might recommend. I can see that that kind of approach utilizing AI in a really robust IP framework to look at the preferences of the experience behaviors of our audience and use that to generate recommendations for additional experiences or connections or purchases. So things that they could really kind of help to continue to make these experiences where people do come away from the comfort of their homes and come into that shared experience much more kind of meaningful and connected as a result of that personalization.
That's amazing. Speaking of collaboration, you've worked with large organizations like Marriott International. There couldn't be a much bigger brand. Could you share more about your collaboration with them and, the impact your work had with their customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So we partnered with Marriott International and PCMA and SEMA, who are some industry associations, to look at trends in experience design. As we were doing our empathetic research and listening to different contributors, what became apparent to us was that there was a little bit of fatigue around this idea of trends, especially coming out of the pandemic. It seemed a little futile to chase something that was so fleeting when such big kind of organizational transformation was occurring. So that led us to generate a report called The Guiding Principles in Experience Design. And in that initial report, we found six different guiding principles that are shaping the future of experience design. There's architecting choice, exploring identity, the power of play, designing for belonging, value of values. And now I'm trying to remember the last one, emotional data. There you go. So emotional data, different ways of measuring. Those were the 6 guiding principles that came out of that initial report. We have subsequently continued our partnership with Marriott to take those guiding principles into a series of workshops and engagements throughout the year in 2023, just to take them into the marketplace place, allow people to get curious, play around with those, share their insights. And in 2024, we've continued our partnership with Marriott to help them produce the toolkit for designing belonging. And that one of the insights that came out of all of the workshops that we did was that belonging really is this through line through all of those guiding principles. Architecting choice allows the optionality so that people can experience belonging. Exploring identities is all around that authenticity of expression and connection with other humans that allows that sense of belonging. Emotional data is one of the main ways that you can measure belonging. The value of values, being values aligned is a huge component of belonging, and play and collaboration are outcomes of high performance and a sense of belonging on teams. So, our discussions with Marriott really kind of saw belonging as being this through line, this red thread, this connective device. So now the toolkit that is coming up for release really focuses in on that restructure of the guiding principles. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. I actually just finished up, or next week is our final week of presentations for the NYU Masters in Event Management program. They have been partnering with Marriott International as their client this year to come up with some concepts for events that will design for belonging using those guiding principles. So it's been this real kind of nice full circle moment, and I'm super excited to see the final presentations of the students. It's been lovely to see them really kind of take on those Marriott principles and apply them thoughtfully and intentionally to event design. So yeah, that's another great example of partnership that's kind of come full circle.
That's amazing. And you also have the future, let me read this correctly, the future of empathy paper. I don't know if it's a paper.
Yes.
Paper.
Yes, that's on our website. We have a very active papers section. Yeah. Which is going to get even more active in 2025. We're really kind of leaning into the collaborative paper creation, which is exciting. So for that one, I partnered in authoring it with a wonderful, wonderful human called Carolyn Dolezal. She is the COO currently of America's SAP user group. And she and I actually first connected when she was CEO of C200, which is a group for female CEOs and C-suite execs. We have just been soul companions when it comes to the work of empathy and understanding the benefit of empathetic practice. And Carolyn has a wonderful perspective on leadership and the value of empathy in leadership and how to kind of bring that into practical applications within organizations. So Carolyn and I think we authored that paper maybe 18 months, nearly 2 years ago now. And lo and behold, this past year, empathetic leadership has soared to being one of the top leadership values that are reported by groups like HBS and Forbes. So that's a really good read. And I do encourage anybody to check out the storycraftlab.com website, the papers section. You can see that paper and more that kind of looks at the way that empathy is really this constant when it comes to innovation and effective, enlightened management.
That's amazing. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, if you look back on your career, what are the best advice would you give to people who's maybe just want to enter your particular field or something similar?
I think it would be, and if the field is experience design, it would be to pick up on what I mentioned earlier in the conversation, which is be confident in the value that you can bring. to the group. When you step into the world of experience design, you are naturally going to be playing with other people. This isn't a solo sport. This is absolutely a team sport. So really kind of be confident in the value of your curiosity, of your perspective, and really kind of talk to those new stakeholders and team members that you encounter on your journey to ask how you can partner with them. Bring those questions and do that work of listening, audience listening for yourself. Sit down and kind of listen to the advice that they can offer you, because I think if you ask people for advice on your journey, you'll be better off for it, and they'll feel more emotionally connected to you.
It's amazing. And there's a famous quote saying, "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." And since you have a lot of books in your background, can you talk about the influence of reading books that had in your life?
Oh gosh, yes. And you have a lot of books too, John Paul. So it's, for me, I was always an avid reader. That would be the thing as a child that would get me in trouble, because I could stay up at night, and my parents would find me in the wee hours of the morning reading a book under the covers. There are many stories I could tell you about that. But for me, books, and it's in the company name, Storycraft. There is a beauty and a poetry to the stories that we tell one another, and stories are really kind of central to our shared existence, our shared humanity. They're the ways that we imagine our futures. They're the ways that we express ourselves to others. There are the ways that we listen and understand one another better. The book is this magical portal to stories, and a way of us leaving the intelligence and the curiosity and the reflections that we all have individually and collectively for the rest of the world. And to me, a book is a gift.
That's amazing. And do you have any book recommendations for anyone who might be listening, particularly for anyone who might be interested in learning experiential design?
Oh, there you go. Well, I kind of have to do this. I'm going to shamelessly promote the Belonging Playbook. And we do have a companion website, thebelongingplaybook.com. It is for the designers of experiences who wish to create experiences that will produce belonging as an output. So please go check out the website, read the book. There's a lot of content on the website to get you started and get you inspired, and then you can get the book. But I think that creating belonging for humans is really going to be the primary driver of the experiences that we design and create in the future. So this will be an essential playbook and support for that.
Do you have any last message for anyone who's listening?
Just thank you for listening. And anytime, I know that I've been talking about my story a lot on this podcast, and it's really a privilege to be able to do that. I do a lot of listening to other stories, but anybody that is interested in sharing their story with me, please get in touch on LinkedIn very easily. I'm very responsive over there, and I'd be happy to hear more stories on belonging that anybody would like to share.
That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated on future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.